very warm welcome to all of you for this distinguished lecture. In the first series of these lectures, I used to come up on the stage and say that the School of Social Sciences for the last 50 years has upheld values such as truth, knowledge, beauty, compassion, love, courage, and has given both meaning, substance, and visibility to this university. And you guys got tired of listening to me lecture after lecture after lecture saying the same thing. So in the second series, I decided not to speak at all. I didn't come on the stage, I gave no welcome address. I just sat in that corner and allowed my colleagues to chair sessions and welcome people. You can't keep a teacher away from a microphone and away from repeating something. So here I am, I've said it. We've not only upheld these values, seriously upheld these values, continue to do so. It's reflected in the diversity of people who have come and spoken in these two series. It is a tribute to the audience also of the university, coming from various schools, academic disciplines, political ideologies, that we have heard these lectures with a great sense of participation, sense of respect, tolerance, and where differences had to be aired, were aired in a civilized fashion. So that's a great thing about these lectures as well. Since one is supposed to introduce the speaker, I've always had a bit of discomfort in the age of the internet to introduce a speaker. What can I say about Professor Sankaran Krishna, who I warmly welcome this afternoon? What can I say about him which you can't read on the net? So alternately, I would take a paragraph from somebody's work and read out a paragraph. But when I was preparing for welcoming Professor Sankaran Krishna, I chanced upon his own profile at the University of Hawaii. And I think it's seriously the most charming, the most brilliant profile anybody has written about himself. So what I'm going to do is to simply read it out. So this is how it goes. This is Sankaran Krishna saying, I grew up in an India where movies still began with a films division documentary heavy with the theme of development and ended with the national anthem. My high school finals in Madras coincided with the defeat of Mrs. Gandhi's Congress party in the parliamentary elections of 1977 and the resounding rejection of the emergency. The experience probably awakened an interest in politics and contemporary affairs that has endured. I enjoy reading widely with a special affinity for South Asian writing in English. I am a life member of the world's largest club of the perennially disappointed, the Indian cricket fan, and firmly believe that behind every subcontinental academic lies a failed cricketer. I consider myself very fortunate to get to live in Hawaii and to have the colleagues I do. He then goes on to list his education, the courses he teaches, and then the research he does, and I'm going to read out of that as well. I work in the areas of international relations, post-colonial studies, and political economy with a focus on India, South Asia. I am especially interested in how the project of nation building in post-colonial South Asia has evinced ethnic, regional, and other resistances, even as it has failed to deliver on development and dignity to the majority of its people. The second strand of my research is on the discipline of international relations, specifically on its Eurocentric epistemology and its obliviousness to matters of race, colonialism, and inequality on a global scale. I'm currently at work on a book that examines the changing biopolitics of citizenship in India since independence, and I'm keeping a wary and increasingly worried eye on the rising tide of Hindu fundamentalism in the country. The last thing that he says about himself is community engagement. In recent years, dissatisfied with the rather limited circulation of academic books and articles, I have taken to writing for newspapers, news magazines, websites, and blogs. For nearly 3 years, I wrote a regular column on cricket for ESPN, and I've regularly published pieces on politics, contemporary affairs, and public culture in the Hindu Economic and Political Weekly, The Wire, India Today, and other publications, mainly in India. I think that's a wonderful introduction. I am delighted, honored, privileged that Professor Sankaran Krishna is here this afternoon, and just in case your profile requires a voice introduction, I'd be happy to do it. But jokes apart, great privilege, great pleasure. He's been interacting with students and colleagues since morning. He's going to be here for a workshop another day. And so, apart from this lecture, please feel free to have an informal engagement when we go out for tea or wherever you could find him if he's in a state to do so. But with great pleasure, I invite Professor Sankaran Krishna to deliver the Social Sciences IOE Distinguished Lecture. Sankaran Krishna.
This is taking outsourcing to its ultimate level. So I'd like to begin by thanking Professor Jyotirmaya Sharma, not only for that very well-written and generous introduction, but for inviting me to be part of this wonderful occasion, the School of Social Sciences Golden Jubilee Distinguished Lectures. Now, having done some sort of such administrative work myself, I know the huge amount of behind-the-scenes work that putting together such a series entails. So I extend my sincere gratitude to both Professor Sharma as well as to the many individuals who have toiled to make this series happen. I was scanning the list of previous speakers just to get a sense of what the series is about. And of course, the first reaction was to say, oh no, there's no way I can, hold my own against this series of speakers. But I was also struck by the fact that one of the people who spoke very recently was Professor Niladri Bhattacharya. Way back in 1980, when I finished my bachelor's degree in chemistry from Loyola College in Chennai, and on a wild and completely sort of whimsical decision, decided to go to Delhi and join JNU. And then, as luck would have it, I got into the Center for Historical Studies at JNU for my master's. And one of my teachers there was Niladri. And befitting a person with a background in chemistry and really no background in history at all, I decided fairly early on in JNU that my best way through the program was to keep my mouth shut and both my ears wide open. because I was learning so much. And one of the professors who really made a deep impression on all of us at that time was Niladri. Sometimes professors impact you with the content of what they are saying, their research, etc. But I think for most of us, the really deep impression comes from them sort of embodying the sort of life you think you want to lead. So I had gone to Delhi with very vague intentions and plans, maybe become a journalist. I was always into writing. And failing that, maybe do something like join the civil service or something like that. Academia was never something that I saw myself as getting into. And it was really seeing people like Niladri doing the things that they did, how passionate they were about this business of reading, of writing, of research. That's what opened up, I think, a way of going through this world. So suffice to say, Niladri and others like him at the Center for Historical Studies are largely responsible or to blame for my decision to pursue academia and to forego other careers in journalism, etc. The other person who was in the list of speakers that I saw was Nivedita Menon, who happened to be in JNU at the time that I was there as a student. And of course, her most recent book, which I think she spoke out of when she spoke here, was titled Secularism as Misdirection, which in many ways anticipates some of the things I'm going to say, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is about secularism as diversion. Secularism as a way, especially in India, of not talking about certain things, of not talking, most importantly, about caste and caste inequality, and using secularism as an alibi, as a way of securing not only the cosmopolitan, pluralist status of Indians domestically, but also portray us internationally as a very unusual society in the context of the third world. So that's one broad context from which I'll be speaking. A second one is really a puzzlement over the last 10, 15 years. For somebody of my generation, secularism seemed inevitable and as much a part of our society as, say, regular elections or democracy. It was one of those things we took for granted. And it has been startling to see the speed at which secularism as an ideology, as a principle, as a political position adhered to by any political party, has lost favor. And if you want to put it in political science terms, one of the things that brought me to this topic was a puzzle, which is how can something that seemingly was so enduring a part of our social has fallen by the wayside as fast as it has. By the way, am I audible, clear? Everything at the back? Okay, great. So, moving along. In this talk today, I suggest caste, casteism, and caste hierarchies were and are simultaneously produced and denied through over-attention and over-performance on the matter of a narrowly defined secularism, one that emphasizes religious tolerance and pluralist coexistence amongst the two main religious groupings in India, namely Hindus and Muslims. This commitment to a diversity defined exclusively at the level of mainstream religion produces what I would consider a thin and anemic rendition of secularism that was especially characteristic of the period from the early nationalist movement all the way till about the 1980s. Now, the period post the 1980s has not only seen the rapid unraveling of this thin secularism, it has seen, as we all know, the consolidation of Hindutva at the very expense of this secularism. The discrediting of this secularism has been the pivoting point of the emergence in some way of contemporary Hindutva. The thinness of Indian secularism at the outset, its avoidance of the matter of intra-religious, within religion, inequalities, hierarchies, patriarchy, and caste, has meant that it lacked a social base, was anchored in a very narrow and elite constituency in each of the major religious groupings, and was therefore unable to withstand the onslaught of the politics of resentment orchestrated by the Hindu right. So in broad brush strokes, that's the summary of the talk I'm going to present. So secularism from the outset is poised as a desirable virtue against the evils of communalism, itself defined as a form of religious separatism or religious nationalism, and further something that is ascribed more to the Muslim than to the Hindu, who is seen by default as an Indian nationalist, even if sometimes of the less than ideal variety. So secularism constituted an alibi for upper caste preponderance across all religions. I want to make clear that caste, as we all know, is not confined to Hinduism in South Asia. Caste is pervasive in all our religions. And we can talk about that more in the Q&A if you wish, but that I want to put it out there as a statement right at the outset. Secularism constitutes an alibi for upper caste preponderance over political, socio-economic, and symbolic power in India, rendering that preponderance legitimate or unproblematic because they presided over a national project that is pluralist, progressive, enlightened, modern, and forward-looking. In other words, secularism is a crucial component of an overall carapace that seeks to transmute the dominance of caste elites over a deeply and enduringly hierarchical society into the hegemony of a progressive and modern leadership that unites the nation in its quest for development and sovereign equality in an international order. It constitutes India's post-colonial nationhood and its elite as tolerant, liberal, pluralist, etc., despite the overwhelming preponderance of upper caste domination. This gains further salience in contrast not only to India's immediate neighbors, who are all seen as religiously majoritarian societies, and more generally in the Third World, most of whose regimes were either explicitly confessional or accord primacy to one ethnic religious group. So the first slide I'm going to show is from a recent piece by Huzaifa Omer, who interestingly enough is going to be at the workshop starting tomorrow, and who has been writing, in my view, some of the most brilliant recent stuff on issues like secularism, casteism, and intolerance within India. So Umair notes in this essay that he writes, diversity conceals the force of an immense and machinic regulation, whereby difference is absolutely regulated through the positing of a neutral site. Projects that otherwise function so differently, like Gandhi's village as the caste ideal, Nehruvian secularism, and post-colonial theory, are tied together by this commitment to diversity. So this emphasis on diversity as the sort of virtue in and of itself is what underlies the limits of the Indian secular. And this is something that Ambedkar puts his fingers on as early as the 1920s and 30s, but sort of nails his understanding in a paragraph that he writes sometime around 1945. And it's to this paragraph that I first want to turn to, because Ambedkar is laying out here his idea that to look at India through the way that it is done, both domestically and internationally, serves to occlude caste. So here's the paragraph. Is that legible from the back there? It is? Okay. Let me just quickly read it so that we have a grasp on it. The population of India is generally classified on a linguistic or on a religious basis. These are the only two ways of classifying the people of India, which have been persistently in vogue for a long time. The effect is that outsiders get the impression that what is of interest and importance to know about the peoples of India is the religions they profess or the languages they speak. And then he goes on. Now, Ambedkar's contention was that this way of looking at India, as comprising of Hindus and Muslims in a linguistically diverse milieu, occludes or disappears the Dalit, and with that, the question of caste. Despite being a fourth of the population of undivided India, the untouchables did not figure in this ubiquitous India picture, as it were. They were enfolded within the category of Hindu when it served the purpose of Congress to inflate the number of Indians they claimed to represent, for instance, against the British, but kept outside of it through everyday practices of untouchability, caste discrimination, segregation, proscribing intercaste marriage, and outright violence prevalent all over urban and rural India. Despite their significant numbers, to Ambedkar's chagrin, Dalits were never accorded the possibility of nationhood in the way Muslims or even Sikhs had been at various points along the way. So from Ambedkar's point of view, a secularism focused exclusively on Hindu-Muslim issues and neglectful of caste oppression was superficial and unlikely to embed itself in society. His conception of democracy stressed fraternity and friendship, Maitri, based on civic equality as its bedrock. In other words, for Ambedkar, secularism was the name for a journey that vastly exceeded the Hindu-Muslim question and ideally culminated in the full equality and fraternity of all citizens in society. It did not emerge from the state merely maintaining a neutral stance between various unreformed, traditional, deeply hierarchical and patriarchal religions, or in handing down rights for everyone to practice their faith undisturbed, either by the state or by those of other persuasions. Such neutrality, or one might call negative liberty, in the context of deep and enduring caste oppression and hierarchy, merely perpetuates a status quo, which is itself in need of radical revision. It is emblematic of what one might call a vacuous diversity, which was really the subsection of the piece that I've just read out. Now, if a country is primarily analyzed through the lenses of language and religion, progressive and regressive categories in politics come to be assessed in terms of how they comport themselves to these two rubrics. So a cosmopolitan or a progressive becomes someone who does not wish to impose Hindi and self-defines as a secularist, purely in the sense that all religions are equal in the eyes of the state. This is what I call the iftar secularist, right? The token demonstration of the equality of the two main religions through the attending of iftar. While a regressive becomes someone who wishes to impose Hindi and believes in Hindutva or in Urdu and the Ummah. In other words, secularism in this narrow sense coincides and converges with the national, while its antagonist becomes a pejorative communalist, and together they exhaust the realm of the political. In this restricted framework, caste is not merely rendered marginal or aberrant, a social issue, but is rendered an anachronism, something that is on the way out, rather than an anathema, as Ambedkar had it. So caste, like gender inequality or class oppression or other aspects of society, was politically marginalized within the domain of the nationalist movement, oriented primarily around anti-colonialism, and any resolution deferred to a post-independence era. So this way of constructing the India picture takes me to the work of the French philosopher and theorist Jacques Rancière, whose very definition of politics hinges upon the way social reality is partitioned for us by conventional or given wisdom, or what is tantamount to the same thing, the hegemonic rendition of social reality in our time. Rancière's notion of partage du sensible, which is often translated as the partitioning of the sensible, alerts us to try and see what is beyond, what is occluded or disappeared, what is rendered speechless or mute by our excessive focus on what is presented to us as the domain of the properly political, or the domain of the attendant public, if you will. So, to move to that quote, so politics involves for Rancière the rearticulation of a partage du sensible by the excluded or unaccounted for elements in a political society. So politics for him is an activity of reconfiguration of that which is given to the sensible. This is really what I see Ambedkar doing there when he lays out that India picture and points to what's not in it. What this excessive focus on language and religion does. Who does it move outside the domain of what is considered sensible? Now, some of this is going to sound excessively abstract. So I'm going to turn to concrete demonstrations of just how such a rendition of secularism in this narrow sense can serve to divert, obfuscate, occlude issues of caste. And one of the first persons I'm going to turn to in this regard is somebody who is very familiar to all of you because he's there in the news every day and virtually a paragon of Nehruvian secularism, Shashi Tharoor. And I want to choose a paragraph from his book, interestingly enough, called Why I Am a Hindu. So in the book, referring to the 1971 war against Pakistan, resulting in the liberation of Bangladesh, this is what Tharoor has to say. During the war with Pakistan in 1971, when the Pakistani leadership was foolish enough to proclaim a jihad against the Hindu unbelievers, the Indian Air Force in the northern sector was commanded by a Muslim, Air Marshal Latif. The army commander was a Parsi, General Manekshaw. The general officer commanding of forces that marched into Bangladesh was a Sikh, General Jagjit Singh Arora. And the general flown in to negotiate the surrender of the Pakistani forces in East Bengal was Jewish, Major General J.F.R. Jacob. They led the armed forces to an often overwhelmingly Hindu country. And then he says, that is India. Now, for Indians of my generation, running into paragraphs like this was routine. We saw this time and time again. This proved the sort of multi-ethnic, multi-religious, cosmopolitan, progressive character of our nation. This is in fact virtually an enactment of India as secularism. And of course, it simultaneously positions Pakistan as the obverse of all of those things. This is how, in a sense, secularism produces the nation. Now, it's interesting, while Tharoor lays out the religious background of each of the top men in the armed forces, it's striking that neither he nor any of the others who showered voluminous praise on this leadership ever speaks about the defense minister at the time. Can anyone tell me who the defense minister was? Jagjeevan Ram, the sole Dalit in the entire cabinet. Now, you may say he was not part of the decision making, he was not a crucial cog in the wheel, which you should stop and realize is proving exactly what I'm saying. That this is the process by which the Dalit is obfuscated. General Jacob of Jewish origin, who came in to preside over the surrender ceremony, somehow had a great role to play in the 71 liberation, but not the defense minister. Right? You see the point I'm trying to make here. So Tharoor's book is a classic example of how a self-confessed and proud secularist can also narrate Hinduism in a way that caste is rendered marginal, aberrant, and a later accretion, rectifiable by an Indian variant of secularism that ironically draws upon ideas of tolerance and respectful coexistence supposedly intrinsic to Hinduism itself. Remember, this is not only the celebration of secularism, this is in a book called Why I Am a Hindu. So in other words, secular principles are being derived from the legacy and contemporary aspects of Hinduism itself. So this anchoring of Indian secularism or tolerance in an expansive and generous reading of Hinduism and its supposedly assimilative genius characterizes not just Tharoor, but a whole genealogy of Indian proto-nationalist and nationalist thinkers, including Nehru, before him, along with him, Gandhi, and before him, Vivekananda, Ram Mohan Roy, etc. So the partitioning of the sensible on this, as on many other occasions, saw the nation as an ongoing project in which the secular triumphed over the communal, with caste simply defined out of the picture. And whenever caste presenced itself, or sought to presence itself, it was immediately described as anti-national, provincial, traitorous, loyalist, secessionist, divisive, sectarian, instrumental, selfish. Incidentally, each and every one of those epithets has been leveled against Periyar, Ambedkar, and others like him, arguing for the salience of caste during the period of the anti-colonial movement. It's also interesting here, Tharoor's book is titled Why I Am a Hindu. It is published about 5 to 8 years after the publication of Kancha Illaya Shepherd's Why I Am Not a Hindu. Nowhere in Tharoor's book is there a reference to Shepherd's book. But one of the first people to review Tharoor's book after it was published in Outlook is Kancha Illaya Shepherd. This should tell us again the relative status of the communities, where one person can ignore a fairly well-noted and regarded book published just a few years before his, with virtually the same title, the exception of the word not, while the other is enjoined to review the book, which ignores his own work. So I want to fast forward to from 1971 to August-September of 2001 to Durban, South Africa, where the UN-sponsored World Conference Against Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance took place. Now, while Indian NGOs and Dalit intellectuals and activists were prominent among those calling for caste and caste discrimination to be included within the purview of the UN and its anti-racist purview of the UN's anti-racist internationalist regime, as it too was a form of dissent-based discrimination, the Indian government, as we know, opposed its inclusion on the agenda of the WCAR. The government India based its stand on two enduring arguments. First, national sovereignty. Caste was an internal or domestic matter, not to be internationalized. And second, caste is not race. The latter is biological or phenotypical, the former is not. We are familiar with these arguments. But like Tharoor's pain to the secularism of 1971, a great deal was made of the fact that the Indian government's dream team opposing the inclusion of caste at the UN conference in Durban was multi-religious. So the delegation was led by Omar Abdullah, a Muslim and Minister of State for External Affairs at the time. The legal arguments were crafted by Soli Sorabji, a Parsi and India's Attorney General at the time. One of the most prominent sociologists and public intellectuals in the country articulating the caste is not race argument was André Bataille of Bengali and French origin. And another prominent sociologist making the same case at this time was Dipankar Gupta, clearly a Hindu and an upper caste Hindu at that. So the absence of Dalits in either the government of India's multi-religious team representing India at Durban or among those who agreed with its stance is striking in retrospect, but hardly commented upon at the time and in the debates. Once again, secularism secured the progressive and egalitarian credibility of the nation and its government at this time internationally through the device of shading caste. Now, the Durban conference is also interesting for a couple of other reasons. This is the one occasion where India is one of three countries isolated and voting against the inclusion of caste and proscribing discussions about domestic matters. And the other two countries are the United States and Israel. And this is one of the first times where India and Israel are together on the idea that, India parts company with the entire global South in refusing to vote on the resolution which equates Zionism with racism, right? So in terms of foreign policy, again, it's a sort of moving closer towards Israel and its idea of a chosen people and nation. And I want to emphasize this is bipartisan. We like to think of this as an exclusively Hindutva project, but as I'll show in my talk tomorrow, India and Israel have been converging closer to each other, actually pretty much since 1948. So I want to move on to the next slide, which showcases another illustrious example of secularism that operates to deny the relevance of salience and caste. And this is the works of our great friend Mani Shankar Iyer. You might think this is low-hanging fruit, but on the other hand, these are the exemplars of the kind of secularism that I'm talking about, right? So this is Mani Shankar Iyer in his recently published memoir, Memoirs of a Maverick, in which he's talking about his days in St. Stephen's. I did make the occasional contribution to the undergraduate satirical journal, Cooler Talk, that lasted for several decades after we left. Asked to write a reminiscence for Cooler Talk on its Silver Jubilee, I began. KT was founded by Sarwar Latif, Peter Phillip, and Montek Singh Ahluwalia. And if you've spotted that they were a Muslim, a Christian, and a Sikh, you are no Stephanian. I want you to pay close attention to these words because they are both brilliant as well as how secularism gets performed as this cosmopolitan, inclusive space in India. So this last sentence is fascinating as an example of the production of distinction through disavowal. For Iyer, noticing the fact that the founders of the journal were of three different religions disqualified one as an authentic alumnus from one of India's most prestigious colleges. And yet it is precisely by drawing attention to that which should not be noticed that Iyer is able to produce and reproduce hierarchy and distinction within the Indian social. He underlines St. Stephen's location at the apex of India's educational pyramid, a place where religious pluralism or tolerance is so commonplace as to be invisible. He secures secularism against the communal and the religious, as coterminous with the desired national, and he writes himself and his fellow Stephanians as modern, cosmopolitan, and progressive because they do not see religion, even as they revel in the fact that they do not see religion. Moreover, as an upper caste Hindu making this observation, Iyer positions Hinduism and caste privilege as the invisible backdrop against which the three distinct religions of Muslim, Christian, and Sikh of the inaugural editorial board of Cooler Talk gains distinction or meaning. So Iyer's equation of the secular with the progressive national has no room anywhere for the Dalit in this evocation of the good old days of the good old boys. To any Dalit, what would seem to stand front and center in the above quote is that the writer of these words has the surname Iyer, indicating his status at the apex of India's caste society. That this is a Hindu celebrating his camaraderie with a Sikh, a Christian, and a Muslim, where they're all united by their fluency in English, their upper class and upper caste status that allowed them to access St. Stephen's, their self-fashioning as heirs to the new nation, and that this homosocial nation in the making never finds space for the Dalit in its memoirs or its reminiscences, for the simple reason that they were never there. So at a later point in his memoir, Iyer recounts an episode in which he is directly confronted between his caste background and his claims to being secular. And this happens, appropriately enough, at a meeting on secularism and democracy in Tamil Nadu, leading up to his election from Mayiladuthurai as an MP. So he says, again in the same memoir, my most challenging moment there came during the Q&A session when a girl dressed in the standard black of the Dravidar Karagam asked, how dare I speak on secularism when my caste was emblazoned in my surname? So in other words, this young woman is pointing to exactly what Ambedkar had been talking about back in 1945. How do you speak of secularism when your caste status is standing and screaming right above you? So Iyer goes on, sometimes spontaneity comes to one's rescue. Instead of being fazed by her question, I told her the first time my name had been printed in the newspapers was when I stood first in Delhi University in the economics honors exam. I then slyly added that if there had not been an Iyer dangling at the end of my name, the credit would have gone to Uttar Pradesh, where Manishankar was a common enough name. I stressed the Iyer in my surname was not a caste name in North India, where I had been raised, but an identity tag pointing to my Tamil origins. Now, there's all kinds of evasions going on here through language, through, merit, through other stuff. So I'll just briefly unpack it. Iyer is clearly pretending not to understand the import of her rhetorical question at all, which was about the meaning or worth of a secularism that did not include caste within its ambit. Iyer's response instead is to digress into regional or linguistic diversity and to academic merit. A few of the non sequiturs in his response are worth unpacking because they relate to the production of distinction and hierarchy within India and to the ways in which secularism serves as a diversion from matters of caste, class, inequality, and hierarchy. First, Iyer seems to think that the publication of his South Indian caste surname in a newspaper for his meritorious academic achievement in Delhi University would somehow redound to the pride of all Tamilians. There is here a narrow understanding of individual academic merit that ignores structural privilege. It's entirely possible that the young woman would have dismissed Iyer's academic achievement as both predictable and pedestrian, given the opportunities his caste and class had afforded him. I mean, this is a guy who went to Doon from day one. By the way, his memoir is full of how poor his family was because his father died early. And I keep thinking, how many poor people go to do in school from day one? There's such a kind of obfuscation of, the difference between income and wealth. And this for a guy who majored in economics? Okay, moving on. Secondly, responding that Iyer is not recognized as a caste name in northern India, but merely a signifier of Tamil or southern origins, is just plain disingenuous. For some time now, all across urban India, and in fact in all too many parts of the world, the short form Tam Bram has become ubiquitous. Iyer seems to think that being raised in the north somehow exculpates him from caste privilege. There is here the familiar, quote, "I was not even aware of my caste as I grew up," which of course can be said only by an upper caste person in our country. So how can I be casteist? Alongside its conflation of individual innocence with structural privilege. And third, notice the meticulous detail contained in the phrase first class economics honors exams. Iyer's memoirs, his voluminous writings as a columnist and author, as commentator on television, are replete with references to academic distinctions and privilege and pedigree, or lack thereof. They frequently serve as a metric in the allocation of value or merit to friends and adversaries alike. The honors in the quote, the ons in the quote, refers to honors stream within Stephens and Delhi University, and emphatically not to be confused with the unembellished degree that most others acquired, or as Iyer once described a rival within the Congress party, he's a BA pass from Hansraj College. So I turn next to the genealogy of this attenuated notion of secularism that emerged in the first half of the 20th century and the reasons for its consolidation. So put it bluntly, a huge step in this regard was the confinement of caste and untouchability to the realm of social reform and the elevation of the communal question to the realm of the national and the political. And in this regard, the figure and politics of Mohandas Gandhi were gigantic. While authors like Ashish Nandi and T.N. Madan were correct to argue that Gandhi was not a secularist and that his ideas of tolerance or coexistence came not from a liberal democratic notion of separation of religion and state, but precisely from religiosity itself, what they failed to understand or see is that the Gandhian idiom of politics was critical in moving caste into the domain of reform and non-violent social change, thereby clearing the political space for the dyad of the communal versus the secular. In other words, for the Nehruvian vision of secularism that came to dominate India's politics. Now, Gandhi's sequestration, his separation of caste from the domain of the politically actionable and into the domain of social reform, and the conscience-changing actions of individuals was most evidenced in the domain of his practice of non-violence, that is, for the thing that he is most celebrated both domestically and internationally. Indeed, his philosophy of non-violence was the very site of the exclusion of the Dalit from the domain of agency and politics, because Gandhi saw ahimsa, or non-violence, as practicable only for those who had the physical and moral capacity to practice and perpetrate himsa or violence. He repeatedly suggests that it is only those capable of inflicting violence that can be truly non-violent. This is true of both individuals and nations. There is an amalgam of Brahmin and Kshatriya values in Gandhi's concept of who the ideal satyagrahi could be. It combines physically courageous aspects of the Kshatriya with the intellectual, ascetic, and self-abnegatory qualities of the Brahmins. Gandhi is also very clear that ahimsa cannot be practiced by the weak, the Shudras, let alone the untouchables. His support for Chaturvaranya, or the fourfold Varna system, and his repeated injunction that it is better to be true to one's vocation than to excel in that of another's, also index a desire to sequester the use of violence to certain groups within society while disarming the rest. The embedding of Gandhian non-violence in casteism is, to my mind, still inadequately appreciated or understood, let alone critiqued. Now, I offer two contemporary examples of such a partitioning of the sensible when it comes to wherein even otherwise perceptive scholars perpetuate the very division that Gandhi does by enacted by casting caste into the realm of social reform and national independence into the domain of the political. So the first one I want to turn to is Faisal Devji in his book, The Impossible Indian, Gandhi and the Temptation of Violence. So Faisal Devji observes the following. Friendship for Gandhi was not a universal category, and certainly not one that might effect an undifferentiated national mobilization. It was instead a very particular relationship that could only subsist between certain classes of people, in this case among religious communities like Hindus or Muslims, or political classes such as the Indian and the British. Indeed, the Mahatma was quite clear that friendship or mitrata was only possible among equals, while those like the so-called untouchables, who were placed by history or politics in a position of inferiority, had to be engaged by the principle of service or seva instead. And then, amazingly enough, Devji moves on. He never comes back to pick at this idea or insight, which is an astonishing statement really, which confines the untouchable to a position of eternal or ontological inferiority, one unworthy of friendship or brotherhood, but merely an object to be served for the benefit of the server. Yet in the passages before and after this quoted excerpt, and indeed throughout the text of his work, Devji is eloquent about how Mohandas Gandhi's struggle was not so much against British colonialism per se, but one that sought to set a precedent that would free the world as a whole from violence. Leaving India and its socius behind, walking right past it, this mode of abstraction universalizes Gandhi, but in doing so, what is thrown out of the picture is caste. Now, my second example of what I would call the consortium of international diasporic and post-colonial canonization of Gandhi comes from Akhil Bilgrami, who's the chaired professor of philosophy, religion, and politics at, ironically, Ambedkar's alma mater, Columbia University. So this is what Bilgrami has to say about Mohandas Gandhi. He was the greatest anti-imperialist theorist who ever wrote. Greater, in my view, despite his rather impoverished understanding of the concepts of class and race, than Lenin or Fanon or Said. Now, I draw your attention to a couple of things about this quote, besides the obvious hyperbole. Class and race are mentioned, but caste is not. For the Indian modern, especially in their conversations within a global academic or intellectual public sphere, caste has to be inferred from its absences, not from its presences. To adduce caste in that list of anti-imperialist concepts alongside race and class would immediately provincialize the discussion. Move it into not just an Indian space, but an unseemly, mufassil, vernacular, non-cosmopolitan space. You're literally going to feel infra-dig bringing up caste in conferences abroad because you are presenting yourself as the face of a civilization. And so race and class are okay, but bringing caste into this discussion is the move that is evaded. It also, interestingly enough, positions people like Bilgrami as the interlocutors of India in a very sort of unified sense abroad. I can clarify this further if needed. So Gandhi's foremost intellectual and political adversary, Ambedkar, disagreed with his view that a politics bereft of religion was no politics at all. And his dictum, Gandhi's dictum, that Hinduism, like any other religion, ought to be assessed by what was best about it rather than its worst aspects, like untouchability. Instead, Ambedkar saw Hindu religion as the ossified sediment or residue, consecrated by passage of time and habit, of an originary violence that hierarchized society into the twice born and the rest. This hierarchy was now manifest as an unthinking set of discriminatory practices, rituals, customs, and taboos. Ambedkar recognized that the birth of any legal order was marked not by a social contract willingly entered into by putative equals. Rather, every legal order originated in violence, but the monopolization of power by a fraction of society, which thereafter sanctified and reproduced this monopoly on violence and power through the realms of the social and the religious, through custom, in other words. To uncritically separate the social from the political, to regard the former as the domain of charitable social reform and the latter as the place of genuine action, as Gandhi and Congress were wont to do, was to further mystify the illegal, or I should say pre-legal, immoral, and violent foundations of any given order, and to partake in its further entrenchment as sacred tradition or custom. Now, the maintenance of this order required not merely an elaborate set of quotidian practices centered on distinctions of purity and pollution, on proscribing even that most basic of human actions, that of touching another human, but more importantly, through continuous and egregious violence against anyone, but especially the Dalit, who sought to renegotiate this ascribed status. Violence then was not an aberration in this religio-legal order. It was constitutive of it and central to its reproduction. It served as a deterrent to anyone who dare even imagine altering it, let alone act on that imagination. It was this peculiar status of the Dalit, being outside the caste system, but through his negative presence, integral to its constitution and reproduction, that occasioned Ambedkar's insight that Dalits were a part of the Hindu fold. So the key difference between Gandhi and Ambedkar is the latter's understanding that the political was inextricable from the social, that the latter was the site of everyday practices sanctified by tradition and custom that sought to erase the memory but replicate the violence of the establishment of this unequal political, legal, moral order. To reform this through a focus on the social abstracted from the political, through changing the minds and hearts of caste Indians, as Gandhi would have it, was to misrepresent the braided inextricability of the two domains. Reforming caste in this way would be impossible because it focused on everyday practices while leaving the structures of domination intact. Hence Ambedkar's clarity that caste and Hinduism needed to be annihilated, not reformed. As Ambedkar more than once acidly noted, he was not interested in temple entry or interdining qua themselves, but only because they were public spaces, and that meant everyone in a democratic and egalitarian society must have equal access to them. In this, he is very much in the vein of Du Bois, who notes that the anti-miscegenation laws were not because blacks were interested in marrying whites. His opposition to them had more to do with a fundamental sense of civic equality in which anybody should be allowed to do what they wish in a space of sovereign equal rights. So more than temple entry or interdining, Dalit demands focused on equal access to economic and educational opportunities and to real, consequential, or substantive political and economic power. The Gandhian strategy of Harijan uplift made it very clear that the purpose of this effort was the willed transformation of the upper caste Hindu as an act of moral self-making on his part. The Dalit was merely the mute and unthinking floor mat for Gandhi's ethical calisthenics in this regard. So Indian secularism was hobbled, coming out of the gates at independence, on account of its chosen neglect of caste, its narrow and paranoid focus on the dangers of Muslim communalism, and its Bowdlerized Savarna rendition of Hinduism. Clearly what emerged was a checkered idea of citizenship, civic citizenship, recognizing group or communitarian rights in certain contexts, for example, reservations post-1947 for Dalits and tribals, while leaving Muslim personal law intact, yet privileging the individual over the community in certain other contexts, such as, for example, refusing reservations for non-Hindu religious minorities, but passing the Hindu Reform Code Bill. This was the hill on which Ambedkar sacrifices his political career. The incompleteness of the Hindu Reform Bill is what leads him to resign. So such slippage between the letter of civic or equal citizenship and its practices is hardly unique to post-colonial India and is a characteristic of nearly all countries that have dealt with the legacy of colonial rule and its strategy of keeping differing communities in a state of dynamic equilibrium through selective dispensation of carrots and sticks, or what's commonly called divide and rule. Over time, however, one of the consequences of this tension between a theoretical commitment to uniform civic rights for every individual on the basis of citizenship versus a practical desire to redress historical injustices through selective and affirmative actions has been the concerted attack on secularism as a form of hypocrisy, as an appeasement of minorities, as an instance of vote bank politics. By the way, this word vote bank politics, can anyone tell me what other kind there is? It's spoken of as if it's something immoral or wrong. In an electoral polity, politics is about getting votes. There is no other kind of politics besides vote bank politics. But most importantly, as coming at the expense of the meritorious upper caste Hindu. This has been, I think, the successful argument of the BJP ever since Mandal. By the 1980s, over 3 decades of electoral politics based on universal mass franchise and the policies of reservations at both central and state levels had altered the political equation between the upper caste, the other backward castes, Dalits, and Muslims in significant ways. There has been a deepening of democracy in India as Dalits and OBCs have parlayed universal mass franchise and reservations into certain modest advancements in socioeconomic terms and significant advances in political representation at both the center and the state. Yet it is precisely these very modest increments in their status that have appeared as a threat to the very structure of upper caste privilege and what they regard as their meritorious and legitimate inheritance. It has been the Hindu rights political achievement ever since Mandal to channel the self-righteous anger of the upper caste Hindus at their loss of relative privilege to Dalits and OBCs into a politics of scapegoating the Muslim and attacking Congress secularism. Since then, the BJP has successfully displaced the hostility and resentment of upper caste Hindus at the rise of OBCs and Dalits onto a variety of national fragments. The appeased Muslim, the westernized and deracinated Anglophone elite, rice bag Christians, duped by missionaries, urban Nakshals sympathetic to the Maoists, and other real and imagined adversaries. Suffice to say that Congress, befitting its tepid commitment to secularism as an ethic of civil equality in the first place, has not put up much of a fight, let alone a fight on principle. The anemic secularism of what Ambedkar once called a felonious civilization has proven unable to resist the seductions of Hindutva. As the nationalist movement under Congress auspices prioritized liberty, freedom from Britain, over equality, social reform, especially of caste, many feared for the quality of Indian democracy. We cannot say we weren't warned, for the architect of our constitution issued this prescient missive on the eve of India's emergence as a republic. You've probably heard this quote many times, but given the kind of attention Gandhi gets all the time, I want to leave the last word to Ambedkar. So he notes, on the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we'll be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? If we continue to deny it for long, we will do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of political democracy, which this assembly has so laboriously built up. So the failure to include caste in the ambit of secularism, to regard its elimination as constitutive of independence, rather than a task to be deferred to a post-colonial politics of gradual electoral change, has created the space for the rise of a casteist religious majoritarianism that we see today. India's contradictory life continues, and the journey towards a fully embodied sense of civic equality irrespective of caste, religion, gender, or class, for every Indian, remains as fraught as ever. I shall end with that.
Thank you so much for this absolutely brilliant and thoughtful lecture on the topic of secularism and the way it has unfolded over the years. I'm sure there are a lot of questions that people want to ask. I'm going to take questions from arbitrarily one side and then the other. So who's the first? First, Tanvir.
Well, thank you, Professor Krishnan, for a wonderful lecture.
Identify yourself.
Should I stand up as well?
No.
Okay.
No.
So I'm Tanvir Fazal. I teach sociology here at the University of Hyderabad. And my question is regarding, the failure of secularism is evident as what we are going through as of now. And there are different kinds of critiques which have emerged over a period. We mentioned some of them. Now, in all these, whether it is Ashish Nandi's criticism or the earlier debate which you had, Rajiv Bhargava itself, you also had a quotation of Rajiv Bhargava flagged there, and from where emerges my question as well. Now, is what you seem to be suggesting that the secularism as a philosophy or political praxis restricted itself to the Hindu-Muslim question and evaded caste. Now, how do we understand then the extension of, say, reservation, as you yourself mentioned, as a constitution, one of the most protected articles, as well as later on the whatever ways in which the backward classes reservation also entered into the constitutional frame. Today, for instance, social justice is one of the none of them are really necessarily brought the what it's promised, but ultimately these are the questions which continue to be significant ones in our national life, and there are different ideas, etc., formulas about contesting communalism and the rise of the right wing, but nevertheless there are these kinds of contending trends, including the politics of social justice, which I don't think evades the question of caste as such. Further, every critique of secularism comes to rest at somewhere or the other this whole idea of minority protection, as Bhargava was also suggesting. Now, is that one of the reasons? I can understand that the cleavages within were not addressed, for instance, but how would that prevent the rise of Hindu right wing? Are you suggesting that there is a sort of a caste solidarity across different kinds of religious groups, as you acknowledge the existence of caste and other cleavages within different groups, different religious communities? So are you suggesting that this could have been a bulwark which did not emerge?
Two large questions.
No, I'm just for the clarification. I'm just one sentence.
Yeah.
So where do you then see the resistance against the inclusion of scheduled Dalit Christians and Dalit Muslims within the SC fold from within the SC/ST lobbies?
Okay, thanks. I'm going to take a few more questions. Yeah. Anyone here? No, 1 minute. Nobody from this side? Okay. The gentleman there. No, 1 minute. Let the mic reach you. It's reaching. Political scientists must also be patient.
Yes. This is Nilanjan Banerjee from Political Science. My question is, I think, I want to add something. What I felt is also the exclusion of language, because when Shashi Tharoor is writing a book, or Manishankar Iyer or Bilgrami, they are writing a book, they are writing in English. So not just they are excluding caste from their narrative or caste from their the definitions, but it's also the use of the language itself. The English language itself excludes a huge section of the Indian population from reading what they're writing. So will you consider that as well as that language as a tool of exclusion?
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? I'll take one more and then come back to more questions. Yes? No, let it be, let it be. It's okay, it's okay. Yeah. There's one here.
Okay. Hello, sir. Myself, Rahul. I'm from English Language Studies. So my question, sir, with all these talks, sir, can you say the failure of secularism, which you talk about, is it within the framework of the constitution, or is it within the framework of the society itself?
Okay.
Thank you all for great questions. Turning first to Faisal, I think in many ways it was Ambedkar's presence and the prominence he accorded to untouchability that in very powerfully impelled the push for reservations. It was also used in a very instrumental way to confine the reservations not merely to Hindus, but even proscribing those who converted out. It would not extend to that. I'm not sure I want to use the word failure in this context, although I may have done so even in the talk. The fact is that the vision animating this secularism was severely handicapped, despite the critiques that prescient people leveled against it during the struggle itself. So, the politics of social justice is real. It has achieved a number of things. And to that extent, you are in an electoral polity. These decisions do have consequences. So it was not a matter of, a complete or total failure. I think where we do fall short is in giving credit to the very vibrancy of anti-untouchability politics that people like Ambedkar and Gandhi himself brought to this in his own limited way, which was responsible for the reservations that emerged after that. So that would be my response to the first part. Regarding the second, minority protection, is there class solidarity? I mean, there have been recent works by Khalid Ansari and others talking about the fact that if you take the corpus of Muslim autobiographies written since independence, of Ashraf Muslims, the absence of caste in these discussions. No. Yes, there is a class solidarity amongst different communities in India, to more directly answer your question. There absolutely is, because why would class not play a prominent role in these alliances, in these affiliations, in these workings out of the order? In that regard, what I find, that's why I made that reference to iftar secularism, that what became the dominant form of secularism, in fact, Manishankar Iyer is a prime exponent of that. I'll come to that when I answer another question of the extent of hypocrisy involved, because you secure your credentials by wearing the bangala and by knowing your ghazals and all the rest of it, and yet you run from the language when you're caught, as he is caught, making an explicitly casteist comment. So underlying theme there is that Indian secularism has always been underlain precisely by that cooler talk solidarity between the Monte Ahluwalias, the Peter Phillips, the Manishankar Iyers, etc. So caste is never out of the picture, right? I mean, class is never out of the picture when it comes to Indian secularism. And regarding the reservations, I think I just answered in the way that I did, that it was a concession forced out of the system because of the very fears that Ambedkar is prophesying in that final quote. Moving to Nilanjan's, the exclusion of vernaculars, absolutely. I mean, English is a huge part of the symbolic capital of, the Indian social. And you all remember this instance where in an election rally in Gujarat, Manishankar Iyer referred to Narendra Modi as a neech kisam ki aadmi, neech kisam ka aadmi, and was immediately raked over the coals for being casteist, for having used a casteist slur and all the rest of it. What was Manishankar Iyer's response? I am a South Indian. I don't know Hindi. I think in English. I was translating from English, low person, so I said neech kisam ke aadmi. Bullshit. Because in his high school at Doon, he and his Hindi teacher had such an excellent relationship that he translated his Hindi teacher's poems into English. When he was in Pakistan, as, second whatever in the diplomatic hierarchy, he regularly had soirees at his house with ghazals and all the rest of it. So this is a guy who knows his way, and his wife is Punjabi, incidentally, who's an exemplar of that form of narrow upper class secularism that I'm talking about. And yet, when caught out on making a casteist slur, his immediate response was to retreat into speaking only English and not knowing the vernacular. So you're absolutely right. This is a part of the symbolic capital armory of the upper class Indian. Finally, Rahul, is this a failure of the constitution or of society itself? Given that binary choice, my inclination is to go with society. Because for me, what has been depressing, frankly, throughout my life, and this is also in part because of having lived 40 odd years abroad and seeing, not just in the United States, but in places like Korea, etc., that I think we are one of the most deeply hierarchical societies in the world. And this is a commitment to hierarchy that is not confined just to the upper caste, although it's most prominent amongst them. Ambedkar was quite open about this, talking about Dalit on Dalit hierarchies, talking about the impossibility of an idea like socialism in a context like India, given the extent of divisiveness. So, and his final comment really is, constitutions can get us only so far, right? So, given that choice, I would say that again, I don't want to use failure. The weakness of our secularism emanates from society more than it does from the constitutional order.
Do you want to come back on any of the points? No. Any other questions then?
Hi. I'm Akash. I'm PhD scholar at Department of Sociology. So I have two brief questions. One is, how do you understand, or what's your opinion on this differentiation between Hinduism and Hindutva, which is too much into within the progressive, so-called progressive circle, which is also a way of Hindu to not feel guilty about the Muslim lynching. So that's one. And second is how Ambedkar assessed the nation as an idea. I mean, this question more comes from this understanding that whenever the cultural imaginary or any fetish take its own life, then it's also become a way of mobilizing people by breaking the boundaries. So in that way, how Ambedkar assessed the potential of nation for the anti-caste struggle. Thank you.
Any other there?
My name is Tahir Jamal from Center for Comparative Literature. Largely, my question is maybe a follow-up to Tanvir Fazal. What I think is missing in the talk is an aspect of secularization of caste. There is a secularization of caste which is happening when you trace all these different epochs, when it is Constituent Assembly to 2024. In Constituent Assembly, when Ambedkar asked for the community rights, the argument was, a reply was that we are a secular nation, so we can't give any separate group rights for different groups. But when it comes to the contemporary stage, we have a different kind of engagement with caste, which is secularized in different sense. In other ways, caste is secular, but the minority religion is still communal. A clear example may be Rajani Kothari, when he says in the post-90s, after the Mandal movement, the anti-caste movements have a grassroots level engagement, and it is deepening democracy, as you were saying. At the same time, he still says in 1990s, the Muslim movements which started after Babri Masjid demolition is communal. So there is a secularization of caste which is happening. At the same time, there is a communalization of minority assertions. Then I think we can go back to Tanvir's other question, why there is a hesitance to include Muslims and Christians into the fold of reservation. So then the whole answer is, will a success of, you are talking about failure of secularism. What does it mean to have a success of secularism?
One more question there. Yeah, please go ahead.
So, a simple clarificatory question. So the inclusion of Kodeshwar Rao from political science, the inclusion of caste into the debate of secularism, is it because the caste is deeply embedded in religion? Is what my question is.
Well, I'll first address Koteshwar Rao's. Absolutely, I am asking for the inclusion of caste in the debate and discussion on secularism, because all religions, not just in South Asia, but all religions are steeped in categories, hierarchizations like patriarchy and other attributes, shall we say, of modern and pre-modern characteristics. And therefore, I don't see how the equation or equality of religions can happen without addressing those things. So that's my response to that one. Regarding Akash, the second of your two questions was about the potential of the nation as an idea. And where does Ambedkar come out on that? You know, of the three values that he talks about derived straight from the French Revolution, you know, liberty, equality, and fraternity, which in the context of India, he translates fraternity into Maitri. He is very clear that, in a sense, if you can focus on and achieve Maitri, the other two fall into your lap virtually as a consequence. The most difficult part of those three is Maitri, because that is premised on a fundamental civic respect for each other. And it goes even beyond respect for each other, which is still evocative of tolerance. You know, you do your thing differently, I'll do mine differently. Let's coexist without killing each other. That's frankly not a very great political ambition. So given his centrality of Maitri for him, the nation has potential if it can move us in that direction, not otherwise. And there, I think he continuously finds India wanting, because that seems to be the main stumbling block. Regarding the first one, difference between Hinduism and Hindutva, call me old-fashioned, but in this one, I'm a very much kind of, to me, political citizenship, political community, political engagement does not require the overt presence, practice of religion. I prefer to hang on to that liberal distinction between public and private domains and seeing religion as something which is practiced in the private domain, and everybody should have the freedom to practice their religion in that regard. So the short answer, I'm guessing, is overt expressions of your Hinduism come very close to Hindutva as far as I'm concerned. And the third, Jamal, these are really excellent, good questions. The second answer, what is a successful secularism, is one that takes on board these aspects that you put your finger on, which is namely that when the minorities get together to struggle for their political rights, to this day it is seen as communal. That suspicion of Muslim solidarity as communal. And I agree with you that Kothari is not free from that. I don't think it's not just Kothari, but too many of our leading intellectuals, both here as well as abroad in the West. When it comes to Islam, that suspicion naturally rises. And there's no point in ducking that question and admitting to it. Regarding secularization of caste, you said something that intrigued me. There was a recognition of community rights in the immediate aftermath of independence. That's why reservations come into place, and that's also why the Hindu Code Bill is passed. This is a recognition that an complete adherence to the notion of individual rights in a post-colonial polity is not going to redress significant economic and other inheritances from the colonial period. So, the Uniform Code of Conduct is put into the directive, is put into the, into that box, which is the wish list for the future, rather than that which can be acted upon in the very moment of becoming a republic. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there is a recognition of community rights over and above individual rights. It kind of collapses in the case of property and things like that, but it's there in this domain when it comes to both reservations as well as the Hindu Code Bill.
No, so the larger question, as I saw it, was that if secularism, as practiced by the Manishankars of the world as exclusion of caste, then isn't that secularism also indulging in a double exclusion, which is to communalize all minority responses? What's your take on that?
I am very sympathetic to that take, that it does, wittingly or otherwise, communalize all other forms. And it does so in this ornamental fashion, as I said, where secularism comes to be this practice of interfaith tolerance, which abjures class and other distinctions, even as it celebrates this elite solidarity. Yeah.
The gentleman there.
My concern is with this word failure, and with the concern of the idea of failure. That is, what is wrong with a weak secularism? We haven't seen a strong secularism work anywhere in the world. It's a bogey that we are using, which we construct, and I think it's important for us to think about why we construct this bogey. What is the trope of the strong secular doing for us conceptually? And how does that position us as interlocutors of this concept? So, a weak secularism speaks of work. It speaks of engagement. It speaks of complexity. It speaks of unfinishedness and impossibilities. A strong secularism is a geostrategic, what is the word?
import.
Not import, a geostrategic fantasy, right? Which it comes from Curzon. It comes from a different space altogether, right? So why is it that we want this? Why aren't we happy with? And why don't we see what weak secularism is actually doing? What does weak secularism allow for in Indian practice? What does it? Of course, there are always these bogies: Hindutva, radical Islam, something. But what actually is weak secularism doing in this? And why is failure this? I've communicated.
Okay. Any other question? Ganeshwar.
Hello, sir. I'm Ganeshwar, from a PhD scholar from Political Science Department. If I can have one more crack at, I think, what is being attempted is that in Ambedkar's articulations himself, he is talking about two failures of the nationalist movement. And one is the failure of the nationalist movement to be fair to the untouchable. And two is the failure of the Hindu nationalist movement to be fair to the minority religions. Right? He's here saying that the caste Hindu is driven simply by his self-interest, his community interest, and there is no politics here. There is only community interest. And in Ambedkar's writings, he's saying that the majority nationalism has developed a doctrine by which it is calling the right of any minority to express its self-interest as communalism. So in Ambedkar's writing, throughout, he is insisting again and again that this majority nationalism, the Hindu nationalism or the Indian nationalism, is unfair to the Muslim and it is unfair to the Dalits. And he has, in this way, there is an evocation of a minority position, a subject minority position, where he is bringing these things together. Why, when we know that the history of Indian nationalism has been that it has had has a Brahminical Hindu core, why are we positing one against the other? As if the Indian nationalist movement has been steadfast in its commitment to the Muslim question and has failed the Dalit question. Well, that is not the case, and that is not what Ambedkar has written. Is there a contrast between?
One last question. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you, sir, for the insightful lecture. So my question is, why race has become an important tool or device in theory building? Why not caste? Because this is not just predominant in India, but whole South Asia and Asia, like Japan and Korea too. And what made race to come out of the dominant narrative of a white man's burden, and why not caste from upper caste Hindu dominance? Thank you. Second part is why, what made race to come out of white man's burden, and why not caste from a Hindu dominant society?
Brown man's burden. Yeah. Okay.
I didn't get I don't recollect your name. Shamuel. Yes, right. Now your old face also comes back from KL. That's a great question. Now, absolutely. Where has secularism succeeded? Nowhere. We've seen this now, especially post-immigrant European Union and other places that, I've always felt this secular claim for countries like France was like, yeah, it's like what Tocqueville said about America in the 1850s. In a completely Christian country, where is the, conflict over these things? It's only after immigrants, after a religiously diverse population. Now, for me, and this is where the sort of, the foundational Marxist in me comes out. I think quite a few of the problems we have faced cannot be separated from the fact that in terms of political economy, as a developing nation, we've failed. The kind of growth that we needed to move out of what Myron Wiener famously called a politics of scarcity, to one in which one can think of things like civic tolerance, cooperation, all the rest of it, that underlying material basis has not been there. So much of what Hindutva has been able to capitalize on are precisely these, colossal rates of unemployment and underemployment, the complete absence of prospects. It's in that context that you can not create these, but capitalize on these social fractures, right? So, for me, the critique of secularism that I level keeps coming back to the fact that it is also about caste inequality. It's about class inequality. It's about misogyny. I mean, we are the world's number one. Now, while I agree with you in one sense about that, this is the classic argument delivered against this argument of mine everywhere. My response to that always is, what is the point of hanging on to a concept as an ideal and something worth fighting for, if, in its strongest form, it is unable to address any of these things? It's also about what is the work that this secularism and the successful secularism did in terms of shoring up the legitimacy of a government or of a regime that was not able to deliver on that developmental promise. You see what I'm saying? As a legitimating principle, secularism worked very well for 3-4 decades to distinguish us internationally, to distinguish us regionally. You can think of democracy as in the same way, by the way, electoral democracy serving that same function for India. So part of my critique here is, in a sense, to put secularism in its place. And the way I do that is to bring in these other things, which I think are, following Ambedkar, very fundamental to the idea of secularism. By the way, Nehru in one place says, any society that is casteist cannot be secular. This is Nehru himself. So I'm in good company when I say we need to broaden this discussion of secularism to include these things. And you may be right in a methodological sense. Like if I were a dissertation student, my advisor would probably tell me, you're broadening the concept to the point where analytically it could get, if not useless, at least blurry. So point taken, but I have my reasons for bringing it, for widening it. And that is to address what I think has been the fundamental reason for our failure, which is the failure of our development, process going back to independence. On every yardstick that we can think of, we have failed, which makes the current... Fair enough. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah. Like I said, I have my reasons for putting it on there. Yeah. Regarding Ganesh, so two failures. It's unfair to untouchables. It's unfair to minorities. I mean, I agree with you, but what's fascinating for me post-Mandal is how, in a sense, upper caste privilege has sort of anchored itself on playing the failure of one upon the other, right? So there's just so much powerful evidence that the resentment against the rise of the OBCs and the scheduled tribes and other scheduled castes has been the driving force of Hindutva. And that's why its manifestation through discourses of merit on the one hand, and then against Islamic fundamentalism, terrorism, and all the rest of it is so. So it's not like we disagree. And I mean, Ambedkar is writing in a period prior to what Jaffrelot calls the deepening of democracy, etc. Why race and not caste? Wow. In some part, what labels get picked up, what debates get entered into, what categories are used, are themselves reflection of a global political economy of knowledge production, status, etc. And in that regard, race has traveled much better than caste has. This is not to provincialize caste. I think Isabel Wilkerson's book on, you've seen this book, right? But it hasn't succeeded, for example, in the US in capturing the imagination, where she sort of says race is caste, that caste is the underlying grammar with which we have to understand these forms everywhere. So I think given that the US has a preponderant influence on all of these things, and this is predominantly couched in terms of race in the US. And also, let's not forget Nazi Germany again. So I would say those are the reasons why. And part of my effort really has been, in a sense, to deprovincialize caste and talk about it in these settings as not something, this is the classic upper caste strategy, right? To mystify it. And you can see this even in book reviews of Wilkerson's book, including by Arjuna Appadurai, where it's like she really doesn't get it. There's nothing to not get here,
I think we'll bring this to a close unless somebody has a very compelling question to ask, which will cause existential angst and worse. Okay, one there.
Brave man. Who is the
Hi, I'm Sai Ganesh. I did sociology from here itself, Hyderabad University. So, I saw you coming there, you're talking about OBCs. So, if we have to put up with our secularism as in our country as a concept, or if we have to live up to the expectations of secularism, I guess how BJP has come up to power is because of using the anxieties of OBCs, and the issues which were of OBCs, which Congress did not cater to. So that's how BJP has come up to power. And that's how again I think Congress has come back to this question of OBC caste census. I'm thinking it loudly. Yes.
So the question. Come to the question.
More of sort of a comment, I guess. How far do you think is the question of OBCs important to maintain this concept of secularism in this country? How important is it? And I think you are almost coming up to that point when you're replying to someone, you're talking about OBCs also. I think that is very important about the OBCs. My area of interest is also OBCs, so that's why I thought of bringing it up.
Okay.
And one last point.
Okay.
When you said about Dr. Ambedkar's with due respect, I slightly disagree with this point. You said he took up this concept of liberty, equality, and fraternity from French Revolution, but he himself says he took it from Buddha. So that one point I just wanted to flag. And one other point last.
No. You're greedy. Questions are allowed, not gluttony.
You may well be right on the last one, that he derived it more from Buddha than from... I was going by what's in the book. It's liberty, equality, and instead of fraternity, a word which is male. Mitrata is more, both genders. So, but yeah, you may well be right. Regarding the OBC comment, what is striking about the BJP is not unlike the Congress in its pomp. The strategies vary from state to state to state. So what you're saying about OBCs is probably true in the states that you're concerned with, and with the OBC population being what it is, etc. They are playing a completely different game in Tamil Nadu, for instance, in trying to expand. So there's no one generic answer. I hate to say this about them, but as an electoral machine, they have been pretty impressive. I'm always impressed when Indians organize and get together and do something efficiently, because frankly it happens very rarely, and usually it happens for the wrong kinds of things. But this is a political party that's actually been quite efficient in this regard. So yeah.
Right, we must bring this to a close. Thank you very much, Professor Sankaran Krishna, for a very illuminating and interesting talk, which I'm sure while we have coffee, the questions will continue, and I thank you on behalf of the School of Social Sciences for agreeing to be here. I thank all the volunteers who now, like the BJP election machine, are a well-oiled organization. They keep winning. And I mean that as a compliment. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. There's tea outside, so come and join us, please.